It is an honor to be here with you all. It's especially an honor to be at the Hoagland Lecture Series. I knew Peter. I spent some time with him. He was a real leader and someone who was wise beyond his years. And, you know, our political system is better for his service. And it was when Jim asked me to do this, there was never a question that I would say yes. In many ways, because I wanted to go to the spring game. So the 2012 Obama campaign started, interestingly enough, on Christmas Day of 2010. I was with the president. As Jim said, I was the deputy chief of staff, which is the best job in Washington. It's a job that Karl Rove had. It's a job that Harold Ickes had. It's a job that Josh Lyman on the West Wing had. And it's a job that I had, and I loved that job. And on Christmas Day, the president called. They called and said, "The president would like to take you for a swim in the ocean." And I thought to myself, this sounds like a bad idea. So we get out there and we're kind of treading water, and I'm kind of looking down. I'm thinking, you know, what if like a Navy SEAL just comes and grabs me and takes me down? And he looked at me and said, "You're leaving the White House." I thought to myself, I'm being fired in the Pacific Ocean. And he said, "I want you to run my reelect." And I paused and said to him, I thought to myself, I've wanted this job since the 4th grade. And I absolutely will take it. But I looked at him and said, "Mr. President, I want to ask you one question. And that question is this: I want you to promise me that the second campaign won't be like the first." And he looked at me strangely, which he tended to do, and said, "Messina, what are you talking about? You know, I won that one." And I said, "Yes, sir. I was there. Best party of my life. But if you run the same campaign you did last time, you're going to get beat, and you're going to get beat badly." And he said, "Okay, I'll make you that promise if you'll make me one." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "I want you to run the best grassroots campaign this world's ever seen." And I said, "Okay, this is going to be really, really hard." And he said, "Yeah, I know." He's like, "But just go do it right." So fast forward 1 year, when Jeff's former employers, the New York Times, 1 year before Election Day, put on the front cover of the New York Times Magazine, exactly 1 year before Election Day, a picture of Barack Obama and said, "Is Barack Obama toast?" And their political model gave him a 17% chance to win re-election. And our approval rating that day was 43% in one poll and 41% in the other. Exactly a year later, 9 days before the election, the president called me, and I was in Chicago and he was on the road. And he said, "Will you fly out tomorrow to see me on the trail?" And at the time, we had 5,000 staff around the country. Running a 5,000 staff thing was kind of a busy job, and I didn't usually travel with him. And I said, "Mr. President, we talk all the time, you know, can we do it on the phone?" He's like, "No, I want to talk to you. I want to see you in person." I said, "Okay." So I flew to, I think it was Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and landed, and I was very excited about this because Katy Perry was performing. And I was pretty sure that Katy Perry and I could have some destiny together. And you all will remember that Katy was in the Obama dress. She built a dress around our logo, which I thought rocked. And so I was talking to her, and I was pretty excited about that conversation. I didn't notice the president had walked up. The president tapped me on the shoulder, said, "Come here, I want to ask you my question." And I looked at him and said, "Okay." And we went to the side, and he said, "Let me be perfectly clear to you, Jim. If I lose in 9 days, the entire world is going to blame two people, you and me." And he's like, "I am going to be a one-term president, which doesn't usually fare well for the history books, and you're never working again." and I said, yeah, I know. I'm very clear the consequences to me on this one. And he said, "What does your computer model say?" And every night for a year, we ran 66,000 computer simulations of the election. And I said, "Mr. President, you are going to win." Well, before I tell you what I said to him, imagine this scene, okay? You think I look skinny and haggard now? You should have seen me then. 47% was not a political theory. It was the percentage of McNuggets I ate as part of my meal every day. That summer, the president had been at an event with my then girlfriend, and she said, "Mr. President, you look great." And he said, "Thank you. Do you know why I look great?" And she said, "No." And he said, because I pay Messina to worry, and he looks like crap. And so the president looked at me and said, what does your model say? And I said, Mr. President, you're going to win. It's not even going to be close. You're going to win with 332 electoral votes. And he said, Jim, the Gallup poll, and I realize I'm in the state of the headquarters of the Gallup organization, says I'm down a couple points. He's like, my only question for you is this. Are you right? And I said, yes, Mr. President, I'm pretty sure I'm right. And he looked at me and said, okay, you better be. I'll see you in 9 days. And I walked out, thinking to myself, that was probably the most important moment of my life. And I thought to myself, you know, I better be right. And then I thought to myself when I was in the 4th grade. I ran my first presidential campaign when I was in the 4th grade at Roosevelt Elementary School in Boise, Idaho, where I was Jimmy Carter's campaign manager against Ronald Reagan. We were beaten like a tin drum. And I literally wrote in my class journal that year, they asked you what you want to be. And I said 2 things: the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos, which would have occurred if not for John Elway, or campaign manager to the president. And so I'd wanted that job for a very, very long time. And as Jim said, I worked on campaigns forever, and I was privileged to do what I got to do. They were stupid to pay me because I got to do what I love. One of the advice I would give the students in the room is do what you love, because if you don't work on something you love, you'll suck at it, and you won't have a great life. And every day the president paid me, it was stupid to pay me because I would have done it for free. So years later, I was Max's chief of staff when the phone rang. And I picked it up, and his voice goes, Jim? And I said, yes. And he's like, it's Barack. And I'm from Montana. I'm not the brightest Montanan. And I said, Barack who? Oh, it gets worse. And he said, Obama. And I said, oh, yeah, right, and slammed the phone down. And Zeleny reminded me that his 7-year-old niece is in the room, so I'm not going to cuss. But I said some words, and none of them were good. And my assistant came running in and said, you just hung up on Barack Obama. Then I said worse words. And he called right back and said, hey, I need you to move to Chicago this weekend to become chief of staff for my presidential campaign. And I said, well, Senator, you know, my boss is up for re-election. I got a dog. I got a house. I got a new girlfriend. Like, you know, things are kicking here. Like, you know, I can't do this. And he said, Messina, I'll see you in Chicago this weekend. So I did what anyone would do. I called my mama. And I said, Mama, what do I do? And my mom said, baby, this is not that hard. She's like, in my lifetime, 2 politicians could change the world, Barack Obama and John F. Kennedy. And she said, if you turn down that job, you're out of the will. Which wasn't a big threat in my family. Like, you know, it means you don't get grandma's plate. And so, I took the job, and when I got the deputy chief of staff job, he called me, and I was at a University of Montana Grizzly football game. They actually win football games. And that was for you. I'm kidding. So he called me and offered me the job and said, hey, Messina, do you want to go change the world? And I thought that was the single best way to get a job offer in political history. So back to the beach. I left the beach and went on a grand tour and went and interviewed every single person I respected around the country and world who were doing interesting things. I sat with Steven Spielberg, who said to me, Jim, you're only the 1965 Rolling Stones once. The second time, you're a mid-level touring band that charges too much for your tickets. You got to figure out how to be sexy and cool again. I sat with Steve Jobs before he passed, and he held up his iPhone and said, in 18 months, everything you do has to be on this or it won't matter. I sat with Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, who ended up becoming kind of my mentor, and he said, don't hire anyone on your tech team or your digital team that's ever worked in politics before, because you want to blow it up and run a new kind of campaign, because if you don't, you're screwed. And so I went into a room in Hawaii and locked myself in a room. My girlfriend called it a beautiful mind with awesome catering. and read every book about the last 100 years of campaigns and wrote on whiteboards and white pieces of paper and wouldn't let the cleaning service touch them, everything I wanted to do to build this campaign. And I walked out of the campaign and decided this campaign had to be about three things to win. First, we had to change the game on technology. We had to completely redefine how you talk to people. Second, we had to run the biggest grassroots campaign in American political history. If we had the same electorate that voted in 2008, we win, everyone's happy. We have the same electorate who voted in 2010, we lose, I'm ruined, the country is in trouble. And third, we had to control the debate. If it was, history teaches us, if it was a referendum on the incumbent and the economy, you lose. If it was a choice between two candidates, you win. Bill Clinton said to me very crucially, Jim, never ever forget, all American presidential elections are always about the future. And if you win the fight for the future, you win the presidency. And so we decided to do a few things. If you think about it, campaigns are only about three things. You raise money, you persuade voters, and you get your supporters to turn out. Everything in those three things was something we were going to measure every single day. And I want to, before I talk to you about the tactics and how we won, I just want to remind people that we won because of Barack Obama. We won because he had the vision to move this country forward, and in a choice between two candidates, we had the better choice, and we won. But the 10 lessons, I think, and I'll walk through them very quickly, that I learned on this campaign was, number one, hire smart people no matter how old they are. Very early, we debuted a technology for this iPhone that has kind of revolutionized politics called Dashboard. No one on the team that built this was over 25 years old. That is an important lesson. And very early, I went to the president and said, I want this guy to be the CTO, Chief Technology Officer. He's very hard to get. He's a genius. Will you meet with him? And he said, of course I'll meet with him. Who is he? And I said, I need to tell you one thing before you walk in the room. And he said, yes. And I said, he looks like the lead singer in Slayer. And the president goes, what's Slayer? And I said, it's a heavy metal band. And he's going to have piercings and tattoos, and he's a genius. The president goes, I don't care what he looks like. If he's the right guy, let's go get him. And so we started recruiting people all over the country who'd never worked in politics before. And they ended up changing the way you do American politics forever. And Eric Schmidt should get some credit for that. Second, my favorite political philosopher is the singer Cyndi Lauper, who once sang a very true thing about American politics. Money changes everything, right? And the Citizens United Supreme Court case in the middle of my reelection completely changed everything. For the first time in American political history, the incumbent president was outspent by super PACs. $690 million spent against the president. And we combated it with contributions from people averaging $51. Ended up raising more than they did, over $1 billion, because we went to the grassroots and changed the way you do politics. Third, the era of mass marketing is over. When Jeff and I are severely old, and when we were growing up, the nightly news was controlled by three people, NBC, ABC, and CBS. Now, and I ran this graph for the president, 16 different people have a share of the network, or have a share of the political news every single night. If you're a young woman, you love Rachel Maddow. If you're a college student, you watch Jon Stewart. You know, the month before the 2010 elections, what the #1 most watched political network, news network in America was? Univision, which shows you that they have a big pipe in a very diverse world, and that's changed the way you do politics. Fourth is, because of Citizens United, there was such unlimited spending. In 2008, in the McCain campaign, the average voter in a swing state saw 20 ads from John McCain and 20 ads from Barack Obama. In 2012, the average voter in swing states saw 80 ads from Barack Obama and 100 ads from the Republicans. That just changes the way politics did. So on May 26th, I went in to the president and said, Mr. President, I want to put all our chips in the middle of the table. I want to spend a huge majority of our October money in the next 3 months, because I think at the end it won't matter, and the fight is right now to define Mitt Romney before the Republican convention. Romney bet differently and decided not to, and he outspent us the final month, but by then we'd already done what we had to do. Fifth, we spent $1 billion to figure out one truth, which is what your friends and family and neighbors say turns out to be the single most persuasive thing in American politics. Let me give you an example why that's important. When people are talking, after all these TV ads, to process everything that the journalists said and everything the TV ads said, they look to their friends and family. We debuted this amazing technology called targeted sharing, which allowed you to go to our website and log in with your Facebook account. And while we showed you a beautiful 30-second message from Michelle Obama, whom everyone loves, we matched all of your friends on Facebook with our data and told you which of your friends were undecided, which of your friends were unregistered, and had you start organizing your friends. The final 96 hours of the election, 5 million people used that tool, and of those people, 78% of them supported Barack Obama. That is how technology helped Barack Obama. But with all of that going on, door knocking became the single most important thing. People wanted to hear from their friends and neighbor on what they were doing. I realized how useless TV was when I went to Denver, Colorado, home of the world champion Denver Broncos. And we should have. That whole Baltimore thing was ridiculous. I met this amazing family who introduced me to their 3-year-old Jason. And Jason taught me why TV didn't matter. Because they told me this story that every night during dinner, they watched TV with Jason. And one night they decided to do a little civics lesson. And they pointed at the TV and said, "Hey, Jason, who's that?" And Jason said, "That's Barack Obama." And they said, "That's right, Jason. And what does Barack Obama do?" And Jason goes, "Ooh, I know this one. He approves this message." That is why TV was out of hand, right? I told the president that story. He loved that story. He told that story on the trail for only a month because it was his favorite story. The sixth thing is big data is here. We used big data in unprecedented ways. In 2008, we had 12 people on our data analytics team. In 2012, we had over 60 people, including 20 PhD-level mathematicians who did nothing but crunch data at all times. We ranked every voter in every battleground state from 1 to 100 on whether or not they would support Barack Obama, whether or not they would vote, and whether or not they were persuadable back and forth. We predicted the president's final vote in Florida within 0.2%. We predicted the president's final vote in every battleground state within 0.5%. And that's why 9 days before the election, I could look at Barack Obama and say to him, "You're going to win with 332 electoral votes," which is exactly what we did. We ended up measuring everything in our campaign. How far the desks were from the front door was measured by a computer model in simulation. We decided to test our fundraising firm that did direct mail and fundraising, not Jim's world, he did persuasion. And we did it the old way they'd always done it, with a Michelle Obama piece of mail. And then we had our 24-year-old computer guy run his simulation. His simulation outperformed the old model by 17%, making us $340,000 more in one piece of direct mail. That's what data did for us. An example is the final week of the campaign, my girlfriend was knocking on doors much against her will. In Wisconsin. And she said to me afterwards, "You're going to win, and here's why." I was asked to knock on 2 doors on 1 block. The Romney campaign was on the other side. They hit every door. She's like, "The 2 doors were an undecided voter. I was told exactly what to say. And at the end, I gave them a card that was barackobama.com/their name. And a website was designed specifically for them on all their important issues." The second was a voter who hadn't turned in their early vote application. We filled it out. I got her to sign it. I took a picture, put it on Twitter, and we got that vote. She's like, "Meanwhile, the Romney campaign hit every single door. Half the people weren't home, and half the people that were home were supporting Barack Obama." That is using your time as a volunteer more efficiently and using you guys to better be an advocate for the president. The seventh thing is polling is broken. Remember all those polls that you saw through the election? They were completely off all over the place in ways that really changed the definition. I would yell at Jeff repeatedly about the New York Times poll. That was actually one of the more correct polls. The Washington Post poll was off like the entire election, in part for 3 reasons. If you're a student, raise your hand if you have a landline. Right, one in the back. 79% of young people don't have landlines, and yet it is illegal to robocall a cell phone, so you have to dial a cell phone, which means if you're a polling firm and you're on a tight budget that Zelony's being cheap and doesn't give you a lot of money, you don't put cell phones in your sample, and you're going to way undersample young people and minorities. And second, we knew that the share of minority vote was going to get bigger, and the other side thought it was going to get smaller. So we were able to predict exactly what was going to happen in these elections, but the polling all along misrepresented young people and misrepresented minorities in a way that just got it completely wrong. And the eighth reason is early voting has become dominant in American politics. Part of why I knew we were going to win is early voting in the battleground states was a month in some states like Iowa. Every single night we'd go in and survey people who early voted that day, 10,000 people, to check our model. Our model was running within 1% of whether or not we were right on how they were going to vote. So I could accurately predict how people were going to vote. And it's why when people were like, oh, Pennsylvania's in play now, or we're surging in Iowa, I was like, no, you're not. And Jeff said earlier that I seemed calm the entire last 2 weeks. I wasn't. But the data said that I should have been because I knew we were going to do okay. And early vote allowed us to, and I'll give Jeff a little grief because I think he's one of the best reporters in the country. Jeff kept writing these pieces saying, young people aren't going to vote this time, young people aren't going to vote this time. Early vote allowed people, young people, to be involved in a bigger window. And we actually increased the young person's share of the electorate from 2008. More young people voted as a share of the electorate than voted even in 2008, in part because of early voting. And the ninth thing is message matters. Like, we picked a fight on the message. You know, there were actually issues discussed. Contraception became a major issue in this election that wasn't an issue before the election. There were big fights about tax policy. And, you know, if you think about the first debate, which did not go well from my side, it was less about the issues. The last two were more about we did better. And it was important, especially with young voters and minority voters, to actually draw a distinction on the issues in ways that had not been done in other presidential campaigns. And 10th, the candidate, last one, the candidate matters. People would say repeatedly to us in focus groups, I like Barack Obama. I want to vote for Barack Obama. I just need you to tell me how this is getting better. And at the end, Barack Obama won because he had a vision. He did what Bill Clinton told us to do. He laid out a vision for this country. And in the end, we ran a historic campaign. I'm very proud to be part of it, and it will be the best thing I've ever done with my life. But we won because this guy had a vision. And 6 years ago, the very first poll we did in the presidential race, he was at 3%. He's now a two-time elected president. The first president since Eisenhower to win both elections with over 50% of the vote. That is in some ways about our country, and it is in many ways about him. So with that, to talk about those two amazing campaigns and everything else, the new TV star of American journalism, Jeff Zeleny.
Thank you very much, Jim. So as I was listening to that, I thought I would do what we did often during the campaign, is do a fact check of Jim's speech. So I was taking some notes as going through here. So I'll just start with that. It is accurate. I can say that he looked haggard and bedraggled during the campaign. He's all cleaned up nice now. This is the first time I've seen him in a tie in at least 2 years. So he did look haggard. He also mentioned Katy Perry. She did look good in her dress, and I'm a reporter who likes to ask questions. It turns out the dress was made out of a rubber. She was wearing a rubber dress, so it sort of looked like something we've never seen before. So I was at a rally in Milwaukee the Saturday before the campaign, and Herb Kohl, the retiring senator from Wisconsin, was standing there looking at Katy Perry. He said, "What do you suppose that dress is made out of?" And I said, "Senator, it's made out of rubber." Anyway, so he was accurate of that. A couple other things he was probably not quite accurate about, or things he missed. He didn't mention Hurricane Sandy. If you talk to the Romney campaign, what sort of happened at the end of the campaign that was very dispiriting to them was Hurricane Sandy. They really believed that they were getting ahead of steam, that people were giving Romney a second to look because of the debates, and Hurricane Sandy sort of slowed that movement. It may have a little bit. I don't think it changed the outcome of the election, but Hurricane Sandy is something to keep in mind when you look back at the election. I think one other thing that Jim didn't mention is there probably were, in fact, I am certain there were enough voters in America who did not want President Obama to have a second term in the White House, but the Romney campaign did not do its job of finding them and bringing them to the polls. I remember I spent most of my time on the road during the campaign, and I spent a lot of time at an early vote site in Ohio, in Columbus. It was a vacant department store, and the Republican side of the aisle, where the Republican people were handing out flyers and things, was almost entirely empty. Every time I would go there for a month, the Democratic side had a line out the door. So it was clear that the Romney campaign was not doing its job getting people to vote early. But that was also because of some interesting court decisions. The Obama campaign very, very, very aggressively pursued court cases across the country to get those early voting laws in place. And had that not happened in Ohio, had they actually restricted early voting and not allowed voting for a month, or Florida, things perhaps were different. But otherwise, I would say the accuracy of Jim's speech was not bad. So I'd put it on the accurate side of the meter. But anyway, it's been 5 months since the election, so all of us have sort of moved on in Washington, but I think it is important to, or at least interesting, to look back a little bit. So when I was flying here today, I was looking at stories that I had written about Jim Messina, and one that popped out was one that I wrote 2 years ago this week. So I was in Chicago. I was going to get the first interview of Jim Messina going to look at the new Obama campaign headquarters in Chicago. So I was standing outside of One Prudential Plaza on a Monday morning. It was pretty early, and he was late, and he was getting out of a taxi cab, and so we were going to walk in with the photographer to see the office space. Well, it was an empty room, huge room about the size of a football field, and I thought, are they really going to fill this with people again like they did in 2008? And the reason that Jim was going there, he left the White House so early, and after he, it was 18 months until Election Day, was because they knew that they had a tough fight on their hands. The economy was still in a very bad way in a lot of places of the country. So Jim was going there early to set up shop. So I got an early look at campaign strategy by walking around this empty headquarters with him. The only thing that was sort of interesting at all, it was just an empty room, was a stack of maps from the AAA Motor Association. And it was an Iowa map, an Ohio map, a Wisconsin map, a Florida map, a North Carolina map. So I thought, for all the high-techness of this campaign, initially he had a stack of maps from the AAA there, sort of showing the battlegrounds in the country, and they were right, with the exception, I guess, of Indiana, which they really didn't play in, or North Carolina, which they won in 2008, but lost in 2012. But I went back to look at the lead that I wrote on the story that day, and it was a front-page story on Jim Messina, nice picture of him in this empty headquarters. And the reason that this was interesting and important was this was the first campaign that was run by a sitting president outside of Washington. Every other re-election campaign has been run inside Washington, or in the case of the Bush campaign in 2004, Virginia, but within the proximity of Washington. And there was a big debate, actually, internally, if this campaign should be run in Chicago or not. And Jim said the reason that he hoped and thought the campaign should be run in Chicago is, quote, "I want people in the Chicago headquarters all the time to be living, sleeping, eating, and breathing, re-electing Barack Obama as president." And I think what he told me after that, which I couldn't put in the paper because the New York Times is a family newspaper, he said he does not want people to be in Washington sort of surrounded by all the, the rumors and all the second guessing and other things. And I think he said, all the SH, and I'll not finish it since my niece and nephews are here, but all the crap from Washington of, that surrounds these people that infects campaigns. So he wanted to get people out of there. So they were in Chicago for the re-election campaign. And the lead of my story was that Jim Messina had worked 41 steps from the Oval Office when he was a deputy chief of staff, and now he was working 700 miles away. And this was going to be a test if proximity is the key to power. So that was really an open question. Who was going to be running things? People in the White House or in Chicago? And it it turned out that Jim was always on speed dial with the president. And I would go back there and visit the Obama campaign headquarters. I would say once a month or so. I would visit the Romney campaign headquarters as well in Boston. But boy, there was just a huge difference here in how things were being organized and structured. For one, the Obama campaign was so much bigger, 4, 5, maybe 6 times the size of the Romney campaign. And every time you'd walk in the headquarters, it kind of reminded me of being in a cafeteria here, you know, in like Abel Sandoz or Harper Schramm Smith or whatever the dorms are. Just an unruly, these young people, just like it got younger and younger every time I walked in there. And people were sitting on exercise balls, and they had tattoos and piercings, and it was a very interesting sort of a reality show, but these guys were the best in the business. And I remember I would always ask a question every time I would go in and talk with a Messina. We'd talk about Husker football, of course, and then we'd move on to other things. And I said, what's the coolest thing that you've done sort of this week, or what's the coolest thing that these high-tech people have done? He pulled out his cell phone, or his iPhone, and showed me something which I didn't think at the time was all that interesting, but he said, look at this. Someone in his tech department had designed the Obama website so it would fit perfectly on the iPhone. So you wouldn't have to scroll around. So if you were giving money to the campaign, everything was exactly on this screen. I forget the name of that. What's the name of the
scaling.
Scaling, which doesn't sound that interesting, but I looked at the Romney one. It did not fit on the iPhone at all. You had to scroll over to contribute or to sign up. So the Obama campaign thought of everything, but including the scaling. But anyway, from this story, Jim Messina also said a quote that was sort of controversial internally in the campaign a little bit. He said, I really believe the president is the art and I am the science. And I thought, what does that mean, I am the science? But as it turned out, he was sort of running this laboratory of all these things that were going on, and it was actually pretty interesting to watch. But so I spent most of the campaign. This is my fourth presidential, or that was my fourth presidential campaign, just sort of going back and forth from Romney headquarters to Obama headquarters, all across battleground states. And I would always sort of pick up small pieces of information. And I will never forget a woman I ran into in Florida, in St. Petersburg, Florida, the most energetic person I've ever seen. She had a clipboard. I met her at a gas station. She didn't know I was a reporter. She asked me if I was registered to vote. And I said, oh, I don't live here, ma'am. I'm just, in from out of town. And I said, who are you working for? She said, oh, I'm going to a volunteer for the Obama campaign. I'm like, oh, this is hit like a pay dirt as a reporter when you run into someone like that's interesting. And she single-handedly had been registering people to vote forever. On the Republican side, they were paying a firm to do this. It turns out the firm was fraudulently filling things out. So the voter registration effort was just totally different. The Obama campaign was volunteered, and the Republican operation, at least in Florida and a few other places, were paid canvassers, and we sort of saw the outcome of that. So that was one sort of example of how organized the Obama campaign was. But I think if you break down the campaign, a few reasons things happened. Why did Obama win? He definitely ran a better campaign. Without a question, he ran a better campaign. The second reason, the demographics of the country are changing right before our eyes. The Romney campaign would have won in 1984, but the country does not look like 1984 anymore. And the reason that the Romney campaign was so confident that they were going to win, the reason that Mrs. Romney said in a television interview right before the election, I mean, she was talking about moving into the White House and things, was because they were basing their view on the wrong model of the electorate. And Jim is right. I didn't think that young voters, or a lot of people didn't think that young voters would turn out the same as 2008. But they did so because the Obama campaign found them and connected them. And it was organic to some degree, but it was all sort of being concocted on the 6th floor of the Chicago office building. I think one other reason that the Obama campaign won is because the economy was improving month by month by month. He inherited a bad situation, but it reminds me of when I was giving a speech. I was on a panel discussion at the New York Times right before the inauguration. So this is in January of 2009, in an auditorium sort of like this in Manhattan. So the audience was a little bit self-selecting, I guess. And someone was asking me about the prospects for this president. And I said, if the economy does not improve, he could be a one-term president. So there was a blogger there from the Huffington Post who quickly shot out this thing. The New York Times Zeleny is predicting a one-term Obama presidency. And I didn't see this till afterward, but after I walked off the stage, I looked at my BlackBerry, and I had all these messages from Robert Gibbs, from some other people. What are you talking about? One-term president, he's not even been sworn in yet. The inauguration is the next week. And all this intense stuff. I said, hey, if the economy doesn't improve, he might be a one-term president. And all this pushback, finally I said, he is only elected to one term at a time, guys. I mean, these guys came into the White House very confident after 2008, and it quickly changed. But the reason that Jim was in Chicago in April of 2011, opening the door to the headquarters, is because by that point they knew that they needed to rebuild something and that they were potentially in trouble. So the fifth reason that I think the Obama campaign won, they didn't have a primary race. Boy, that would have changed everything if a liberal candidate would have challenged him, and they would have been sort of a force to fend off the primary challenger, because that was the biggest sort of detriment for the Romney campaign, is their primary fight that went on and on and on with Rick Perry and Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum and Michelle Bachmann and a lot of other candidates. So it definitely helped you that you did not have a primary campaign. But the rest of the election, by now has kind of been written, and there actually are going to be a lot of books written about the campaign and things, so we don't need to rehash all that. But I think it was interesting when Jim said that he's wanted his job since the 4th grade. I think I've wanted mine since the 4th grade as well, although I wish I would have asked you about the statistics of broadcast networks not being the most important thing anymore, because I might not have done this. But no, I really owe a lot of thanks to this University of Nebraska for giving me just a great education and an opportunity to be a reporter. So for the students who are left in here, I know it's Friday afternoon. By Friday afternoon at this time, I definitely would have been at Sandy's. So I'm not sure what you're still doing here. But just the work ethic of being from Nebraska that you are able to get here is just incredible. I wasn't ever sure if I could make it actually, at a big newspaper in a big newsroom in a big city, because I'm from Exeter. It's a town of 800 people. I had 12 kids in my high school class, and I was in the top half, but just barely. A group of small. It's true. It's true. But out of that group, there's a doctor, a couple engineers, a really smart group of people. But thankfully, I was admitted to the university anyway. But I realized through internships and other things that, gosh, I can probably compete any place. And I was interviewing for, I spent one summer in Jacksonville, Florida, one summer in Little Rock, Arkansas. And the next summer, I was interviewing for a job at the Wall Street Journal in Boston. And I was, not sure if I would get hired. I thought, they're probably going to hire someone from Harvard. But I went in there and I talked with the guy, and he's like, what, I love the idea of hiring someone from Nebraska. It'll drive the Harvard kids nuts. So they hired me. I moved to Boston. I worked in Boston for a summer, and it was at that moment I thought, what, I can compete any place. A kid from Nebraska, a student from Nebraska can compete any place. And at that point, it became part of my brand. I realized that being from Nebraska is part of your brand. You shouldn't shy away from it. You should embrace it. I think it instills a bit of humility and humbleness, which is a good thing. But I think it should also instill some confidence and courage and bravado. Being part of Nebraska is a great thing. And I think one of the most amazing things that's happened at the university is being part of the Big 12. Not only because as a political reporter, you can definitely see a football game in an away stadium in every battleground state. So thanks for that, Harvey. You can go to Wisconsin. You can go to Ohio State. I sat next to Jim Crounce at the massacre in Columbus last fall at Ohio State. But you can basically go to every away stadium, so I really appreciated that. But don't lose touch of the university, the students who are here. I just think that it is a great network of people, of potential, and I certainly would not be given the skills and the ability to do what I'm doing now and covering campaigns and other things, although I wish I would have taken a couple of broadcasting classes in college, but that's another matter. But anyway, so I give a big thanks to the university, and I think with that, we should have the professor come up, and if he wants to ask us questions, Jim and I can maybe spar a little bit. It'll be like crossfire up here.
Let's go.
always a pleasure to be back in Nebraska. I love it here. The only thing I've gained in California is I don't scoop snow. And a special thank you to Jim Crounce, who invited me to participate. It's a special honor for me. We've reconnected recently, and that's brought a big joy in my life. With that, I'm ready to start asking some questions. This is for both of you. For our undergraduates interested in pursuing a career path similar to your own, what one piece of advice do you wish you had received as an undergrad? You want to start, Jim?
Sure. Can you hear me? I got a great piece of advice as an undergrad that I gave myself, which I would give all of you, which is just, my goal was to be the first person in the office at night and be the last person to leave, and to figure out every single day how to get better at what I did. And you know, I'm like Jeff, I came from a small town, I grew up with no money. I kind of did this, you know, with a bunch of people helping me, and I think it's important to love what you do. And if you love what you do, it's easy. We were talking about how much we love our careers. And you know, Barack Obama didn't need to pay me a cent. I would have done it for free because I love what I do. But you got to go after it. There's a million people with more credentials and bigger connections, and you have to outwork them. And then the other thing is your word has to be your bond. Like, even when I was screaming at Jeff, I knew he was honest. I knew he wouldn't BS me. I knew that we could disagree, but Jeff is an honest guy. And all you have in this world is your reputation. And you have to never, ever BS people.
I think one thing that I've always remembered, it's a piece of advice I learned actually at Barry's Bar, sitting at the bar in the Haymarket, from a guy named Ed Howard, who was an AP reporter here forever, and I worked for him. He's not around anymore, but I was trying to decide if I should take an internship after graduating at the Chicago Tribune or if I should take a full-time job someplace. I'd already had a lot of internships. I said, Ed, I'd like your advice. He's like, kid, and this was kind of well into the evening, and his round was a beer and a shot of Jameson's every round, and I was just having a beer, so he was kind of far along the night. But anyway, he said, kid, never ask anyone for their advice. Ask them for their thoughts. Then it's up to you if you follow it or not. And I've never forgotten that, because the reason that that's important, I think, is you should ask a ton of people for their thoughts from all kinds of different views. When I switched jobs from the New York Times to ABC, I did so much reporting on this. I just asked all kinds of people, but I never asked them for their advice. So I think that's an interesting way to look at it as you're looking for jobs and other things, asking for their thoughts. But Jim's right, work harder. You know, you're from Nebraska, you are, it's part of your ethic, just work harder than anyone ever expects you to, and you will definitely succeed.
Okay, a question for Jim. Last fall's presidential election was the first since the Supreme Court's decision allowing electioneering communication expenditures from corporations and unions. How did that decision impact the campaign strategy of President Obama?
I think the Citizens United Supreme Court case is the worst and most dangerous decision the Supreme Court has laid in a very long time. I think that Jeff had it right earlier when he talked about the fact that it extended the primary in very good ways for us, which was helpful at the time. You know, one billionaire from Idaho gave Gingrich $10 million and kept the primary going for another month, which was helpful. I thought that was a great thing. But on the other hand, just one super PAC, Crossroads, spent total $400 million, mostly in the presidential race, and changed the way we did politics. Part of why we couldn't play in Indiana where we played last time. I was desperate to play in Arizona. Nebraska too, where we didn't play this time and did last time. Were all financial decisions. And we were bleeding money because the other side was just spending unprecedented money. You know, Barack Obama was the first candidate to ever get outspent as an incumbent in the history of American politics. And that's because of campaign finance reform. We survived it because in many ways, news coverage and other things are more important than money. Who didn't survive it were candidates at the congressional and state levels. You know, congressional level ended up getting $3 million of super PAC ads per race. And in the congressional race, that just swamps you. And Democrats should have won way more seats than they did. but the super PAC money was just unbelievable. And I think long-term, that's really bad for our democracy.
Thank you. Jeff, did you want to comment?
I think one thing, I mean, I remember about, I think it was February of 2012, the Obama campaign realized that they had to really do an about-face and strategy and decide that the president was going to bless the super PAC on the Democratic side. Up until that point, he had been opposed to super PAC money, so he had to change his position, and it was a matter of necessity because you guys thought you might lose at that point if he hadn't changed his mind. So I think that at the end of the day, the people who own television stations and consultants and things definitely did very well because of Citizens United, because there's so much more money out there. I think there's just so many ads. If you were anywhere near a battleground state, you saw all the ads. You guys saw it here as well with Omaha television. I think it's a lot of diminishing returns, but boy, was there a lot of money and probably a lot of wasted money because of that decision.
This is a question for both of you. Let's start with Jeff. Do you have any ideas why the Des Moines Register endorsed Mitt Romney?
It's a really good question. I used to work at the Des Moines Register, but not on the editorial page as a reporter. It completely flew in the face of the newspaper's history and traditions. It had always endorsed Democrats. The Des Moines Register, unlike the Omaha World Herald, has changed ownerships. It's not been owned by the same place. There's been a revolving set of editors and things. So, a newspaper is only kind of made up by the people who were there rather than the institution. But I believe that it probably endorsed Mitt Romney because he went in for an interview and sat for an interview. And the president, this was one of the rare times where the White House sort of bungled this communications thing, I think. The president actually called the editorial page editor and the editor of the Des Moines Register for an interview probably a week before it, and they said it was off the record. So the Des Moines Register said, the White House called us, but we can't share what he said, and the White House ended up releasing a transcript. It was kind of a ham-handed thing that happened. I don't know if that played a role in it or not. I don't think it should have, but I think that the fact that Mitt Romney sat for an endorsement was something that the paper thought was important. It was a really controversial decision. And you know what? It obviously didn't matter because Obama won the state by, 7 points?
Yeah, 7 points.
I think newspaper endorsements, other endorsements are very, very, very much overstated and they hardly ever matter at all.
Jim, did that come as a surprise to you?
It did. Their history, they hadn't endorsed the Republicans in 72 or 72, I think. There was a new editor who had just got there and ran their own process. And I would note that after we did not get the endorsement, we went up in the polls 3 points.
It's a liberal media conspiracy.
Here's a question for Jim. Given the significance of the Latino vote in the 2012 campaign, why wasn't more emphasis placed on U.S. Latin American policy issues?
It's interesting that if you think about the one defining issue of the Republican primary, it was immigration. When Perry was surging, Romney knocked him down on immigration. When Gingrich started to move in the southern primaries, Romney knocked him down on immigration. Those moves were covered wall to wall by the Latino media, Univision, Telemundo, in ways that were sort of unprecedented and really politicized that electorate. We, in the Obama campaign, did campaign commercials for a year in the Latino community. Full 6 months before we ever did a general election ad, we were doing ads on Latino television. And we only did one ad the entire time on immigration. We stayed on education and healthcare because those were the #1 issues for that community. The president beat Governor Romney 71-27 with Latino voters. If you look at just the growing American demographic electorate, the modern Republican Party cannot continue to be competitive in presidential elections if they can't fix that problem. And that is why you see the Republicans in D.C. racing to get immigration reform done, because they know they have to do this. I think the Latin American issues were less important to voters than people expected, and it was very much a domestic election.
Jeff, when traveling alongside reporters in the 2008 Obama campaign, what challenges did you face? Was it hard to remain nonpartisan?
I get that question a lot. I don't think it's hard to remain nonpartisan because I decided to become a reporter. And like Jim, he said he started out as a reporter, but he had too strong of political views, so he did not want to be a reporter. It's what I wanted to do. I mean, if I wanted to be a liberal activist or a conservative activist, I would have picked that. But I think that, you know, a reporter has enough healthy skepticism, you know, that I think you're really chasing a good story. You want it to be accurate and other things, but you have to have a healthy skepticism. You know, but one of the other things is that most news organizations sort of rotate you around a little bit. So I did cover the Obama campaign from start to finish in 2007 to 2008, but I jumped on to Hillary Clinton's campaign for a while, and I jumped on to John McCain's campaign for a while. The newspaper does the similar things with the baseball beat writers. They switch the Yankees and the Mets beat writer midsummer for a couple weeks just to sort of get a flavor of the other side. So it's not that hard to be objective, I don't think. I think you're, I believe that journalism is a form of public service, and I believe that our job is to inform the public so they can make a decision on how to vote. I take that very seriously. Most of the people in my profession take that very seriously. So I think, you know, we don't always hit the mark, but the body of our work has to be fair. Otherwise, we're not doing our jobs.
A question for Jim. Did you fear the candidacy of Jon Huntsman most?
I did. I've been on record saying that I thought Huntsman was by far the best general election candidate. He was also a good guy, helped run his confirmation when we appointed him ambassador to China. I did not think at that time he would later run against us, but he was a really good guy, and I think in the general election would have been very difficult. I thought his chances of becoming the nominee were the same as mine becoming Katy Perry's husband.
Okay, switching back to Jeff. Both of you respond to this, please. Candidates today can bypass the mainstream media and talk directly to voters via dozens of electronic platforms. What effect is that having on the democratic process?
I think it actually has a big effect, and this is one of my sort of major pet peeves, that President Obama is a reader of newspapers, but he is sort of allergic to giving newspaper interviews. And he did not do a single interview, a sit-down major interview with the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. He didn't need to. He did some television interviews, quite a few television interviews, but you know, there was the Obama channel in this campaign, you know, through Facebook, through Twitter, through other social media things, so they can take the message directly to voters, bypassing the mainstream media. So I don't think it's good for the democratic process, but as a sitting president, an incumbent president has that luxury and ability to do that because they have the bully pulpit. And he's not unique in this. President Bush, probably to a slightly lesser extent, did it in 2004. But with all these channels out there, as Jim said earlier, there aren't sort of three big voices on the evening news. Probably the most important person is The Daily Show, or the most important show probably is The Daily Show for some of the voters.
Right.
You want to comment?
Yeah, and I think that we really were sort of obsessed with this issue. We counter-programmed all over the place. We went in places no one had ever done. We went to Pinterest, which some of you may know. My team came in and said, Jim, we need to put the president on Reddit. I'm like, excellent, what's Reddit? And 2 days later, when the president was on Reddit, he called me right before and said, hey, what's Reddit? And then 5 million people in 24 hours watched him on Reddit, and a huge number of people registered to vote, all because he went to a non-traditional place, and we got a bigger bang for our buck. And so we pushed hard. We really did call it the Obama channel, and we tried to find as many places. One of the big differences between 2008 and 2012 was this issue. In 2008, we did everything through BarackObama.com. We had you go there. In 2012, part of what Steve Jobs told me, which is true, is you don't care where they go, you just got to program content. So we had 250 people in our content division in the headquarters who just did content all day, every day. One team did Pinterest, one team did Tumblr, one team did Twitter, one team did Facebook, because we wanted to meet you where you were, which is exactly opposite of where we were 4 years before. And I think Jeff's right that that was frustrating to the mainstream media, but we could better control our message in those avenues.
Jim, why did President Obama do so poorly in his first debate?
Do you have any other questions?
I'm going to take notes on this.
Right, exactly. Well, look, what history teaches us is the challenger usually wins the first debate. They won 4 out of the last 5 debates. I think the president was honest that he didn't live up to his own expectations. You know, Governor Romney had debated 21 or 23 times in the primary, and had become a very, very good debater. The president, part of why people like him and trust him, is they can see him piece through his thoughts at these press conferences. His average answer at the press conferences the year before the election was 8 minutes. And then we went to a debate where you had 2 to 3 minutes, and we just didn't get there. The other thing is, you know, I think it's fair to say the president did what we call chasing rabbits. He defended himself too much in that debate, and I think was disappointed in his own performance. I remember after that first debate, he called me up and said, "I promise you I'm not going to make that mistake twice." And you know, that was my moment of crisis communication. The entire world thought we could lose for the first time, and it was a very difficult moment. But it's interesting just from a factual basis. Everything that we got from the 47% comment, we were up in the battleground states about 2.5 points when the 47% comment came out. We went to 4.5. The first debate put us right back at 2.5, but we never went to 1 or tied because we lost everything we had gotten, but the race stayed really constant. There were never more than 8% of undecided voters in the entire election, and those people weren't watching the debate. And so it was just not as big of a moment as people thought. Although when I went into the spin room afterwards, it seemed like a big moment.
Jeff, did you have a comment on that?
I think that the president, you know, through all his debates, he was a terrible debater at the beginning in 2007 and 2008 as well. So that's what he reminded me of that night. But I think, look, he'd spent months of seeing Governor Romney sort of flailing around. He was not the best candidate, and he, you know, underestimated him, I think. I mean, he did not, I don't know if you agree or not, but I think that he thought, you know, the Romney that he had seen in news coverage and in his own campaign ads, I mean, the Obama campaign's portrayal of Romney was not the guy who showed up. Romney was very rigorous about things he could control, and he could control debate prep, and he practiced and practiced and practiced. And Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, he played Barack Obama in their debate prep sessions, and he just really worked him out really hard on that, so he became a very good debater. And that was his full-time job. The president also had a day job, so he wasn't practicing as hard, but I think he underestimated him. Do you agree with that?
No.
Some other people on their team do.
Yeah, I don't think he underestimated him. I think we underestimated Romney switching so many positions. Because if you think about the first 15 minutes, he came out on taxes.
But that was his history, though. I mean, like, that was your attack on him,
but
he flip-flopped.
But you could see the president struggle to push him back on that because his new position was unlike the other 7 positions he had taken. And I think we did not handle that as well as we should have from a campaign perspective. And I think the president, you know, was caught a little bit flat-footed.
We only have time for one last question. I'm sorry we can't answer everybody's questions, but I've been told we have to conclude at 6 o'clock. So I'll end with a blockbuster and start with Jim.
Oh, great.
I'm a Nebraska Democrat. How can we do better statewide?
Well, look, there are models out there. I mean, my home state of Montana, when I was first involved in politics, you know, we didn't have the governorship, we didn't have one of the Senate seats, the House seat, and we were in huge minorities in the legislature, and now we have both Senate seats, the governorship, and one of the houses. And part of what you have to do is, I think, three things. Number one, you have to do what the Obama campaign did and change the electorate. You have to register more people, more young people have to vote, more people who are inclined to be our voters but don't vote have to be involved. Second, you have to get candidates who reflect the state. And my favorite example of this, someone that I know Zeleny likes to cover too, Montana Senator John Tester. If you've seen him, he looks like a Montanan. He has a buzz cut, he has a belly, he's a farmer, he only has 3 fingers, and he unseated an incumbent U.S. senator that people thought he could never win, in part because he reminded people of who they were. And the third thing is you have to take stands on issues. If in states where there's a partisan advantage on one party, if they do not understand the differences between the two parties, they go back to their usual behavior. And so you have to pick issues that there's a difference between the two parties and drive those issues. And that is very hard to do in an age where there's Citizens United money pumping on top of you. But you can do it. If you think about the only issue that was the difference in the primary for president in 2008 between Hillary and the president is probably Iraq, right? And that was an issue that really defined the differences between the two candidates. And that was true if you look at Democrats who unseated U.S. senators in the last 3 terms. It's because there was an issue that drove that decision. And you have to figure out what those issues are in Nebraska and go drive them pretty hard.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you for coming. We'll see you here next year. And a special round of applause.